Cornwall, England. December 1813. The carriage wheels ground to a halt on gravel that had not been raked in what appeared to be years, perhaps decades. Through the frost-covered window, Lady Marguerite Whitfield, no, Lady Montrose now, though the name felt as foreign as a language she had never learned, stared at what was to be her new home. Winterbourne Manor rose from the Cornish moorland like a tombstone, its grey stone walls streaked with damp, its windows dark and unwelcoming as closed eyes. She had been married precisely 6 hours. Her husband had not spoken 10 words to her since the ceremony. The carriage door opened. Lord Alistair Montrose, Marquis of Ravenwood, stepped down first, his movements precise and cold as surgical instruments. He did not offer his hand to assist her descent. Marguerite gathered her traveling cloak, borrowed from a distant cousin, for her father had long ago sold everything of value, and climbed down alone, her slippers landing in a puddle she had not seen in the gathering darkness. It was then that he finally turned to face her, and she saw in those grey eyes something worse than hatred. She saw nothing at all. If stories of abandoned brides and redemptive love move your heart, subscribe now and stay with us. You will not want to miss what unfolds in the years ahead. Our arrangement is fulfilled, Alistair said, his voice as flat as the moorland, stretching endlessly behind the house. Your father's debts are paid. This is your residence. I will not be returning. Marguerite felt her breath catch, felt the first terrible understanding beginning to dawn. I do not understand, my lord. Are we not to reside together? You will reside here, at Winterbourne. He emphasized the separation with such deliberate precision that she flinched. The staff will attend to your needs. Sufficient funds have been arranged. But we are married, she whispered, hating how her voice trembled, how young she sounded even to her own ears. 22 years old, and she might as well have been 12, a child abandoned at a boarding school she had not chosen to attend. We are married in law. That suffices. He pulled on his gloves with mechanical efficiency, his face carved from the same cold stone as the house behind her. The wind that swept across the moorland cut through her traveling cloak as if it were made of gossamer instead of wool. Marguerite looked up at the house again, seeing now how the garden walls had crumbled, how ivy had conquered entire sections of the facade, how several windows on the upper floor appeared to be boarded shut. How long do you intend for me to remain here? She asked, and was proud that her voice held steady this time. Permanently. He said it as one might say, Tuesday or tea. A simple statement of fact requiring no particular emphasis. The staff is competent. The accounts are in order. You will find the solitude preferable to your previous circumstances, I imagine. Before she could respond, before she could summon the words to protest or plead or rage against this incomprehensible cruelty, he had climbed back into the carriage. Through the window, she saw him settle into his seat, saw him pull a book from his pocket and open it as if she had already ceased to exist in any meaningful way. The carriage pulled away, its lamps disappearing into the winter darkness, and Marguerite stood alone on the gravel drive of a house she had never seen before, married to a man who had just informed her he would never see her again. The front door of Winterbourne opened, revealing an elderly man in butler's livery that had gone shiny at the elbows. He held a lamp that threw long shadows across his deeply lined face. Lady Montrose, he said, and his voice held a gentleness that nearly undid her entirely. Welcome to Winterbourne Manor. I am Hartwell. Please come inside. The house is cold, but we have fires laid in the drawing room and your chambers. Cook has prepared supper, though I imagine you may prefer to retire directly after such a long journey. Marguerite climbed the steps on legs that felt distant from her body, as if she were watching someone else walk into this prison of stone and ivy and abandonment. The entrance hall smelled of damp and disuse and something else, the particular scent of a house that has not been loved in a very long time. That night, Alone in a bedchamber where the wallpaper peeled at the corners and the fire could not quite dispel the chill that seemed to emanate from the very walls, Marguerite permitted herself 1 hour of tears. 1 hour to mourn the naive hopes she had harbored despite everything. The foolish fantasy that perhaps her husband might be kind, that perhaps this marriage might become something other than a transaction. When the hour ended, she dried her face, unpacked the single trunk that contained everything she owned in the world, and made a decision. If she was to be abandoned here, exiled to this crumbling estate at the edge of England, then she would not simply survive. She would transform this place. She would make it hers. It was the only power left to her, and she would not surrender it. The weeks that followed revealed the full extent of her new domain's decay. Winterbourne Manor had been neglected for years. Precisely how many years Marguerite could not determine, for the staff spoke of before and after in hushed tones that suggested a tragedy they would not name. The roof leaked in 6 different places. The kitchen garden had become a wilderness of brambles and forgotten vegetables gone to seed. Half the rooms were closed off entirely, their furnishings draped in holland covers gray with dust. The Marquis last visited 8 years ago, Hartwell told her one morning as she inventoried the china in the butler's pantry, discovering that only 2 complete sets remained, both chipped. Came for a week, walked the grounds, then returned to London. Said he would send funds for repairs, and he did, my lady. Always keeps his word about that. But the money went into accounts, and no one here had authority to spend it. Why not? Marguerite asked, setting down a teacup with a crack running through its delicate handle. The butler's face grew carefully blank. The previous mistress, that is, the First Lady Montrose, she preferred Ravenwood Hall. Found Winterbourne too remote, too provincial. Said the cliffs oppressed her. That they called to her, she said. Hartwell's voice dropped. After she passed, well, his lordship made it clear that no major changes were to be made without his explicit approval. And as he never returned, the story was incomplete, Marguerite knew. There were gaps large enough to drive a carriage through. But she recognized the wall of loyal discretion when she encountered it, so she did not push. Instead, she said, I have authority now, do I not? As the current Lady Montrose? Hartwell's expression brightened with something that might have been hope. Indeed you do, my lady. Indeed you do. Within a fortnight, Marguerite had engaged local workmen to repair the roof. Within a month, she had hired girls from the village to help clean and restore the closed rooms. She discovered account books in the estate office that showed Alistair had been true to his word. Generous funds were deposited quarterly, and until her arrival, had accumulated untouched. The house, she learned, was not her only responsibility. Winterbourne included 3 tenant farms, a mill, and a small forest that yielded timber. The previous estate manager had died the year before, and no replacement had been appointed. The tenants paid their rents to an agent in Truro, who forwarded the money to London, but no one supervised the upkeep of tenant cottages, arbitrated disputes, or planned for improvements. You cannot mean to take this on yourself, my lady, Mrs. Hartwell, the butler's wife and Winterbourne's housekeeper, protested when Marguerite announced her intention to visit each tenant farm personally. It is not done. A lady of your station. A lady of my station, Marguerite interrupted gently, has been deposited in Cornwall with no husband, no family, and apparently no purpose beyond existing quietly in exile. If I cannot be a true wife, Mrs. Hartwell, then I shall be a proper landlord. It seems the only useful thing left to me. The housekeeper's face softened with something that looked like pity, but she nodded. Very well, my lady, I will have cook pack you a basket. The roads to the farms are rough, and you will want refreshment. The tenants, Marguerite discovered, were suspicious at first. They were accustomed to neglect, to sending their rents away to distant masters who never appeared and cared nothing for their struggles. But when the young Marquis's new wife arrived at their cottages, listened to their concerns about drainage problems and failing equipment, and more remarkably, returned the following week with workmen to address those very issues. Well, suspicion began to transform into something else. By spring, Marguerite had established herself as more than the Marchioness in exile. Her father might have been a fool with cards, but he had insisted his daughter receive the practical education he himself scorned. Marguerite had spent years managing her late mother's small property, trying futilely to save what her father squandered. She understood numbers, she understood neglect, and she understood how to salvage value from ruin. Now, at Winterbourne, those hard-won skills found worthy purpose. She was Lady Whitfield of Winterbourne, a practical, fair-minded presence who understood crops and contracts, who paid fair wages promptly, who could calculate yields and negotiate prices with a mind sharpened by necessity rather than dulled by privilege. The village of Winterbourne St. Mary, 2 miles from the manor along a rutted cart track, began to welcome her as well. She attended Sunday services at the small stone church, sitting in the Montrose family pew that had remained empty for nearly a decade. She patronized the local shops, paid her bills without haggling, and when the vicar's wife mentioned that the village school needed slates and primers, Marguerite arranged for both. "You have made yourself indispensable here," Hartwell observed one evening as Marguerite reviewed the quarterly accounts in the estate office. Outside, summer rain drummed against the windows, but inside, the room glowed with lamplight and the satisfaction of work well done. "The tenants speak of you with genuine respect, my lady. That is a rare thing." "They respect competence," Marguerite replied, setting down her pen. "And perhaps they appreciate that someone finally notices their existence. I understand that feeling rather well." It was as close as she had come to admitting the loneliness that still haunted her. By day, she filled her hours with work, so much work that exhaustion claimed her the moment she retired each night. But in the quiet moments, in the spaces between tasks, the reality of her situation pressed in. She was 22 years old, married, and utterly alone. Her husband had not written once in 6 months. Her father, saved from prison by her sacrifice, had sent one brief note of thanks before departing for Bath with friends, spending the quarterly allowance Alistair provided him. She had saved him, and he had disappeared as thoroughly as her husband had. But self-pity, Marguerite had learned, was a luxury she could not afford. So she pushed the feelings down, locked them away in the same closed rooms where Winterbourne's ghosts lived, and turned her attention to the harvest planning and the mill repairs that required her approval. It was in this manner that the first year passed. The letter arrived in December, exactly 1 year after her wedding day. Marguerite recognized the seal, the ravenwood crest with its crossed ravens, before she recognized the handwriting. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the wax. "Lady Montrose, I trust this letter finds you well situated at Winterbourne. My steward informs me that you have undertaken extensive improvements to the estate and that the tenants speak highly of your management. This is satisfactory. I write to inform you that I will be departing England for an extended period. His Majesty's government has requested my service on a diplomatic mission to the African coast. I expect to be absent for approximately 18 months. My solicitors have instructions to continue your quarterly allowance without interruption. Should you require anything beyond the usual funds, you may apply to Mr. Bartholomew Finch of Lincoln's Inn, who manages my affairs during my absence. I remain, respectfully." Montrose Marguerite read the letter 3 times, searching for something: warmth, curiosity, even basic courtesy beyond the stark formality. She found nothing. He might have been writing to his tailor about the satisfactory completion of a coat. "Africa," she said aloud to the empty breakfast room. "He is going to Africa, and he writes to inform me as an afterthought, as one might mention the weather." Mrs. Hartwell, clearing the breakfast dishes, paused. "It is a dangerous journey, my lady. The coast, I have heard, is unforgiving. Disease, pirates, all manner of perils." Something cold settled in Marguerite's chest. Despite everything, despite the abandonment, the exile, The crushing loneliness, the thought of Alistair in danger produced an unwanted tightening in her throat. How absurd to fear for a man who had made it abundantly clear he cared nothing for her welfare beyond ensuring she had sufficient funds and a roof over her head. "Then we must hope he takes appropriate precautions," Marguerite said, setting the letter aside. "The harvest accounts from Mill Farm arrived yesterday. I should review them before meeting with Thomas about next season's rotation." She did not think about the letter again that day, or the next, or the day after that. She had learned the art of not thinking about things, of filling every moment with tasks that left no room for contemplation or feeling. It was the only way to survive. 18 months became 2 years. 2 years became 3. In that time, Marguerite transformed Winterbourne from a moldering ruin into a thriving estate. She supervised the complete restoration of the house, room by room, until every chamber gleamed with fresh paint and polished wood. She expanded the tenant farms, negotiated better prices for their wool and grain, and established a small school in the village where children could learn reading and basic arithmetic. The people of Winterbourne St. Mary began to speak of Our Lady Margot with the kind of loyalty that could not be purchased, only earned through consistent care and genuine regard. When influenza swept through the village during the winter of 1815, Marguerite personally delivered broths and medicines to every affected household, sitting through the night with families who had no one else. "You have become what every true lady of the manor should be," the elderly vicar told her one Sunday after services. "A blessing to this community, Lady Montrose. I pray your husband knows what a treasure he abandoned here." Marguerite smiled, accepted the compliment graciously, and changed the subject to the church roof repairs. She had become adept at deflecting conversations about her husband, at maintaining a serene facade that revealed nothing of the anger and grief that still lived beneath her carefully constructed calm. She received 2 more letters during those 3 years. Both were brief. Both acknowledged receipts of reports from his steward about Winterbourne's improved condition. Both contained no personal inquiry, no recognition of her existence beyond her function as temporary estate manager. The second letter, which arrived in autumn of 1816, concluded with a single line that made Marguerite's hands shake. "I expect to return to England by spring. Arrangements will be made regarding your situation." What did that mean? What arrangements? Would he finally visit Winterbourne? Would he demand she leave, having served her purpose in maintaining the estate during his absence? The uncertainty gnawed at her for weeks until she forced herself to set it aside, to continue with the work that gave her life meaning, even if her marriage remained a hollow legal fiction. It was the following January, 4 years and 1 month after her wedding, when everything changed. The letter came from London, but not from Alistair. The seal was unfamiliar, the handwriting formal and impersonal. Marguerite opened it at breakfast, expecting another mundane communication about account balances or legal formalities. "Lady Montrose, it is my solemn duty to inform you that your husband, the Marquis of Ravenwood, has returned to England in a state of grave illness. He contracted a fever of undetermined origin during his final months in Africa and has been transported to his London residence under the care of his personal physician. Dr. Harrison advises that his lordship's condition is critical but not without hope of recovery. As his wife, you are entitled to be informed of his situation. Should you wish to travel to London, arrangements can be made for your accommodation. I remain your obedient servant, Bartholomew Finch." Esquire Marguerite set down the letter very carefully, as if it might shatter. Around her, the breakfast room continued its normal morning rhythm, sunlight slanting through clean windows, the clock ticking on the mantel, the scent of tea and toast. But the world had tilted on its axis, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. He was dying, possibly dying. The man who had abandoned her, who had treated her as a problem to be efficiently solved and then forgotten, he was in London, consumed by fever, and some solicitor thought she might wish to know. "My lady?" Mrs. Hartwell had appeared in the doorway, her face creased with concern. "You have gone quite pale. Is there bad news?" Marguerite stopped, unsure what to say. What was Alistair to her truly? A husband in name only. A stranger who paid her bills. A man who had never once asked if she was happy, lonely, or merely surviving. Lord Montrose has returned from Africa. He is gravely ill. The housekeeper's hand flew to her chest. Oh, my lady, how dreadful! You must go to him at once. Must she? The question rose unbidden. Why should she rush to the bedside of a man who would not have crossed the room to speak to her? Who had exiled her to Cornwall with the same casual cruelty one might show in relocating an unwanted piece of furniture? But even as the bitter thoughts formed, Marguerite knew what she would do. Not because she loved him. How could she love someone she did not know? Not even because it was her duty, though society would certainly insist it was. She would go because despite everything, despite the abandonment and the loneliness and the years of silence, she could not bear the thought of him dying alone, unmourned, unloved. Prepare my traveling trunk, she told Mrs. Hartwell, rising from the table. I will depart for London at first light tomorrow. Send word to Hartwell. I will need the carriage made ready and provisions for the journey. Of course, my lady. The housekeeper paused at the door. It is a good thing you are doing, a Christian thing. Marguerite did not respond. She was not certain it was goodness that drove her. Perhaps it was simply the inability to become as cold and unfeeling as the man she had married. Perhaps that was a weakness, or perhaps it was the only strength she had left. The journey to London took 5 days through rain and unseasonable cold that made the roads treacherous and the nights in coaching inns miserable. Marguerite traveled with only her maid, Claire, a village girl she had trained who proved to have both a practical nature and an unflappable disposition. They arrived in London on a grey afternoon when fog pressed against the buildings and the air tasted of coal smoke and dampness. The Ravenwood townhouse stood on Grosvenor Square, an elegant Georgian edifice that proclaimed wealth and status in every precisely proportioned window and column. A butler Marguerite had never met answered the door, his face carefully neutral as he assessed her travel-stained cloak and simple bonnet. I am Lady Montrose, she said, and watched recognition flash across his features before his professional mask reasserted itself. I have come to see my husband. Of course, my lady. Please come in. I am Grimshaw. Lord Montrose's physician is with him now. If you will wait in the drawing room, I will inform Dr. Harrison of your arrival. The drawing room was magnificent. High ceilings painted with classical scenes, furniture in the latest fashion, a pianoforte that probably cost more than Winterbourne's annual income from all 3 farms. Marguerite stood in the center of the room, feeling like an intruder, like someone who had wandered into a life that did not belong to her. Because it did not, did it? This was Alistair's life. London, society, elegance, and privilege. Winterbourne was her life now. They inhabited completely separate worlds, connected only by a legal document signed 4 years ago and a quarterly bank transfer. Lady Montrose. The voice startled her. She turned to find a middle-aged man in sober dress, his face lined with exhaustion. I am Dr. Harrison. I must say your arrival is most welcome. His lordship's condition is... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Grave. The fever has abated somewhat, but he remains delirious much of the time. He speaks of things that make little sense. Names, accusations. It is quite distressing. May I see him? The request emerged before Marguerite could question the wisdom of it. Dr. Harrison hesitated. He does not know you are here, my lady. Indeed, he may not recognize you at all. The fever... I understand. Nevertheless, I would like to see my husband. Something in her tone must have conveyed that she would not be dissuaded, for the doctor nodded and gestured toward the stairs. His chambers are on the 2nd floor. I should warn you, my lady. In his delirium, he speaks often of his first wife. It may be difficult to hear. Marguerite lifted her chin. I am accustomed to difficult things, Dr. Harrison. Please lead the way. The chamber smelled of sickness, that particular combination of sweat and medicine, and something else, something darker. Heavy curtains blocked most of the daylight, leaving the room in a twilight gloom broken only by a single lamp on the bedside table. In the large bed, barely visible beneath piled blankets, lay a figure Marguerite would not have recognized. Alistair had always been lean, but illness had whittled him to gauntness. His black hair lay damp against his skull, and his face, that face she had seen only a handful of times, always cold and expressionless, was flushed with fever and twisted in some interior agony. He muttered continuously, words Marguerite could not distinguish, his hands plucking at the blankets with restless, aimless movements. "As you can see," Dr. Harrison said quietly, "he is not in his right mind. I have tried various treatments, bark, cold compresses, bleeding, but the fever persists. His valet sits with him through the nights, and I attend twice daily. Beyond that." He spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "Leave us," Marguerite said, surprising herself. "Please, I would like some time alone with my husband." The doctor's eyebrows rose, but he nodded and withdrew, closing the door softly behind him. Marguerite stood frozen for a moment, then forced herself forward, approaching the bed as one might approach a wounded animal, carefully, ready to retreat if necessary. She pulled a chair close and sat, studying the face of the stranger who was her husband. In repose, even ravaged by illness, she could see that he had been handsome once. Strong features, a well-formed mouth currently cracked with fever. The scar on his right hand, visible where it lay atop the blankets, drew her attention. She had noticed it on their wedding day, a pale line running from wrist to knuckle. Rosalind. The name emerged from his parched lips, barely audible. "Rosalind, forgive me. I did not mean, I never meant." Marguerite felt something twist in her chest. Dr. Harrison had warned her, but hearing her husband call for his dead wife while Marguerite sat at his bedside brought home the full futility of her presence here. What could she possibly do for a man who, even in delirium, wanted someone else? She should leave. Return to Winterbourne, where she had built something real, something meaningful. This man was nothing to her, wanted nothing from her, needed nothing she could provide. But she did not leave. Instead, she dipped a cloth in the basin of water on the nightstand and gently pressed it to his burning forehead. He flinched at the touch, but did not wake, and after a moment, his restless movements calmed slightly. "I do not know why I am here," she whispered to his unhearing ears. "You have given me no reason to care whether you live or die. You abandoned me as if I were luggage left in storage. But here I am, because apparently I am fool enough to believe that every life has value, even yours." She continued bathing his face and hands through the afternoon and into the evening, refusing offers of relief from the hovering valet. When Dr. Harrison returned to check his patient, he found Marguerite still at her post, her dress wrinkled and her hair escaping its pins, but her hands steady as she coaxed small sips of barley water between Alistair's cracked lips. "You should rest, my lady," the doctor urged. "There is a guest chamber prepared for you." "Soon," Marguerite replied, not looking away from her patient. "I will rest soon." But she did not. She remained through the night, through Alistair's rambling confessions and accusations, through the moments when his fever spiked so high she feared he would combust from within. She changed the cool cloths, administered the medicines Dr. Harrison left, and when he began to thrash violently, she pressed her hands against his shoulders and spoke in the same calm, firm voice she used with frightened horses. "Be still. You are safe. Be still now." It was near dawn when the crisis came. Alistair's fever spiked to a terrifying height, his skin burning to the touch, his breathing rapid and shallow. Dr. Harrison, summoned urgently by the valet, appeared with his bag and a grim expression. "This is the crisis point," he said, working quickly to apply cold compresses. "Either the fever breaks now, or—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Marguerite found herself gripping Alistair's hand, that scarred right hand, and holding on as if she could anchor him to life through sheer force of will. She was not aware she was speaking until she heard her own voice, steady despite the fear that had wrapped around her throat. "I do not give you permission to depart, my lord," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor beneath. "I forbid you to die. You owe me far more than this cowardly escape. I have spent 4 years making Winterbourne into something extraordinary, and you will not die before seeing what I have accomplished with your neglected estate. You will not die before you explain why you abandoned me there. You will not die before—" Her voice caught. "Before you tell me why you married me at all if you intended to pretend I did not exist." Whether he heard her, she could not know. But sometime in the hour before dawn, as London began to stir beyond the windows, Alistair's fever broke. The terrible heat receded, replaced by a more natural warmth. His breathing slowed, deepened, became the regular rhythm of true sleep rather than delirious unconsciousness. Dr. Harrison exhaled a long breath. "Well," he said quietly, "it seems your husband is a fighter, Lady Montrose. With proper care and rest, I believe he will recover." Marguerite released Alistair's hand and discovered her own hands were shaking. Exhaustion crashed over her like a wave, and suddenly she could not remain upright another moment. "Thank you, doctor," she managed. "I believe I will rest now." She made it to the guest chamber before her legs gave way entirely. Claire helped her out of her travel-stained dress and into a nightgown, and Marguerite fell into bed without memory of her head touching the pillow. She slept for 16 hours. When Marguerite woke, disoriented and aching, the sun was setting again. She had lost an entire day. Claire appeared with tea and the news that Lord Montrose's fever remained down, that he was sleeping naturally, and that Dr. Harrison was cautiously optimistic about his recovery. "Shall I help you dress for dinner, my lady?" Claire asked. "The housekeeper has prepared rooms for you here for as long as you need to remain." Marguerite sipped her tea and considered. She could stay, she supposed. Wait until Alistair recovered enough to acknowledge her presence, to thank her perhaps for her vigil at his bedside. Or she could do what she had done for 4 years, survive without his acknowledgement, build her life without his participation. But the thought of returning to Winterbourne without at least speaking to him, without demanding some explanation for why he had treated her so cruelly, made her stomach knot with frustration. No, she would stay. Not for him, but for herself. She deserved answers. "Yes," she told Claire. "Help me dress. I will take dinner here and visit Lord Montrose afterward to see how he fares." She was finishing a solitary dinner in the elegant dining room, a meal served on china so fine she feared breathing on it too hard, when Grimshaw appeared in the doorway, his expression uncertain. "My lady, his lordship has woken. He is asking, that is, he wishes to know if you are indeed in the house, or if he imagined your voice during his illness." Marguerite set down her fork carefully. Her heart had begun beating very fast, though she could not have said whether from anticipation or dread. "Tell his lordship that I am indeed here, and that I will attend him shortly if he is well enough to receive me." "I believe he would like to see you now, my lady." He was quite insistent. Of course he was. 4 years of silence, and now, when he finally deigned to acknowledge her existence, it must be immediately at his convenience. Marguerite felt anger kindle in her chest, good, clean anger that burned away the anxiety. She rose from the table. "Very well. Please lead the way, Grimshaw." The butler's eyebrows rose fractionally at her tone, but he made no comment, merely conducted her up the stairs to the sick room. At the door, he paused. "His lordship is still quite weak, my lady. Dr. Harrison cautions against causing undue agitation." "I shall endeavor to be as calm as a summer morning," Marguerite replied, though her hands had begun to tremble again. "Thank you, Grimshaw. That will be all." She waited until his footsteps retreated down the hall, then pushed open the door. The curtains had been opened, letting in the last of the evening light. Alistair was propped against pillows, still gaunt and pale but unmistakably conscious, his gray eyes fixed on the door with an intensity that made Marguerite pause on the threshold. They stared at each other for a long moment, and she saw recognition in his face, followed by something that looked almost like pain. "So it was not a fever dream," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "You were really here." "I was here," Marguerite confirmed, stepping into the room but not approaching the bed. "I received word of your illness and came to London." "Why?" The question hung in the air between them, blunt and direct. Marguerite found herself without a ready answer. "Why indeed?" "I do not know," she admitted finally. "Perhaps because I am fool enough to believe that even a husband who abandoned his wife deserves care when he is dying. Or perhaps because I wanted to be certain you recovered so that I could tell you, to your face, exactly what I think of a man who treats another human being as you have treated me." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the ghost of shame. "I see. You wish to deliver a well-deserved scold. Very well. I am, as you can observe, in no condition to flee. Say what you came to say, madam." The formal address stung. Madam. Not Marguerite, not even Lady Montrose. Simply madam, as distant and cold as everything else about him. The anger that had been building for 4 years suddenly threatened to overflow, and Marguerite found herself speaking before caution could intervene. "You married me to satisfy your father's will and to silence gossip. I understood that even then. But what I did not understand, what I will never understand, is why you felt it necessary to exile me. To treat me as if I were not a person, but an inconvenient obligation to be hidden away where I could not disturb your comfortable life." "I did not treat you," he began, but she interrupted. "You did. You married me and delivered me to a crumbling house in Cornwall and informed me you would never return. Never. As if I were being transported to a penal colony instead of what should have been my home. And then you never wrote, never inquired after my welfare, never once acknowledged my existence beyond ensuring the quarterly funds were deposited. Do you have any idea what that felt like? To be so thoroughly dismissed?" Alistair's jaw tightened, but he did not look away. "I ensured you were provided for, generously. You wanted for nothing. I wanted for everything." The words burst out of her, years of suppressed hurt and fury finally finding voice. "I wanted to be treated as a human being worthy of basic consideration. I wanted a husband who might occasionally remember he had a wife. I wanted—" She stopped, breathing hard, and forced herself to regain control. "It does not matter what I wanted. You made it abundantly clear that my wants were irrelevant." It was better that way. His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "Better for you that I stayed away." "Better for me?" Marguerite stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot possibly believe that." "My first wife would disagree." The words came out flat, bitter. She found my presence so intolerable that she threw herself from a tower rather than continue living as my wife. The blunt statement struck Marguerite silent. She had known, of course, that Alistair was a widower. The village gossips at Winterbourne had whispered about the tragic First Lady Montrose, who died young, but they had never spoken of suicide, and certainly no one had suggested that Alistair bore responsibility for it. "I did not know," she said quietly. "No one told me the circumstances of her death." "Of course they did not. It is not the sort of thing one advertises." He shifted against the pillows, wincing with pain or perhaps simply exhaustion. "Rosalind died 3 months before our marriage was arranged. She was beautiful, charming, everything society expected in a marchioness, and she despised me from the moment we wed." Marguerite moved closer, drawn despite herself by the raw anguish in his voice. "What happened?" "She was unfaithful," he said, the words coming with visible difficulty. "With someone I trusted. When I confronted her about the scandal, about the dishonor she brought to our name. He stopped, closing his eyes as if the memory caused physical pain. She went to the tower at Ravenwood Hall. I tried to stop her, tried to reason with her, but she... His voice broke. She chose to end her life rather than face the consequences of her actions. Society said I drove her to it, that my cruelty, my coldness left her no other choice. The silence that followed was absolute. Marguerite could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the distant sounds of London beyond the windows, but nothing else. She stared at Alistair and saw not the cold, cruel man who had abandoned her, but someone broken in ways she could not have imagined. "I am sorry," she said finally, inadequately. "That must have been, I cannot imagine. Society blamed me, of course." He continued as if she had not spoken. Said I drove her to it with my jealousy and possessiveness. My friend, the lover, had the audacity to challenge me to a duel. I refused. What would be the point? She was already dead. Killing him would not change that. "Is that why you sent me away?" Marguerite asked softly. "Because you believed you had destroyed her?" "I sent you away because I knew what I was. A man capable of inspiring such loathing in his wife that she chose death over living with me. I married you because my father's will required it, and because your situation was desperate enough that you had no choice but to accept. But I would not inflict my presence on you, would not risk," his voice broke, "would not risk making you as miserable as I made Rosalind." "So you decided to make me miserable in a different way?" The anger had drained from Marguerite's voice, replaced by something closer to sadness. "By pretending I did not exist? I thought it was kinder." He finally looked at her directly, and she saw that his eyes were wet. "I see now that I was wrong, that I have wronged you terribly, Lady Montrose, and I apologize, though the words are inadequate to address what I have done." Marguerite sank into the chair beside his bed, suddenly exhausted all over again. They sat in silence for several minutes before she spoke. "When you were fevered, you called for Rosalind. You begged her forgiveness." "Did I?" He closed his eyes. "I suppose some part of me still believes I could have prevented it, that I should have seen how desperate she was, should have offered her freedom instead of demanding she pretend to be a dutiful wife." "You cannot blame yourself for the choice she made," Marguerite said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "She was unfaithful, and when confronted with the scandal of her actions, chose to end her life rather than face the consequences. That was her decision, not yours. You do not understand. I was cruel to her. I said unforgivable things." "Perhaps you did." Marguerite leaned forward. "But cruelty in a moment of rage does not justify what she did. It does not make you responsible for her death. And it certainly does not mean you deserve to spend the rest of your life punishing yourself by avoiding any possibility of happiness." Alistair opened his eyes and studied her with something like wonder. "How can you be generous to me after what I have done to you?" "I am not being generous. I am being truthful." Marguerite stood, needing movement, needing to pace to organize her thoughts. "You wronged me, Lord Montrose. You wronged me grievously, but I do not believe you are evil, merely damaged. And perhaps we are both owed something better than the half-life we have been living." "What are you saying?" Marguerite stopped pacing and turned to face him fully. "I am saying that I have spent 4 years making Winterbourne into something extraordinary. I have transformed a crumbling ruin into a thriving estate. I have earned the respect of tenants and villagers who once saw me as an abandoned curiosity. I have built a life there that has meaning and purpose, and I am not willing to give that up. I would never ask you to let me finish." She held up a hand. "I am also saying that being married to a man who treats me as if I am invisible is unacceptable. I will not live that way anymore. So here is what I propose. You will come to Winterbourne when you have recovered. You will see what I have accomplished. And then we will discuss, as rational adults, what sort of arrangement we can make going forward. One that acknowledges my worth and my agency. Or else, we will seek a legal separation and go our separate ways. The silence stretched so long that Marguerite wondered if she had gone too far, if her ultimatum had been too bold. But finally, Alistair nodded slowly. "You have every right to demand that," he said quietly. "I will come to Winterbourne, and I will listen to whatever terms you wish to propose. That is the least I owe you, after 4 years of unconscionable neglect." "Good." Marguerite moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, Lord Montrose. I did not come to London out of wifely devotion or duty. I came because even after everything, I could not bear the thought of you dying alone. I hope, when you have time to consider it, you will think about why a woman you abandoned would still care enough to make that choice." She left before he could respond, closing the door softly behind her. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and pressed her hands to her face, feeling the sting of tears she would not allow to fall. Not yet. There would be time for tears later, time to process everything she had learned, everything that had changed in the last impossible hours. For now, she needed to be strong, to hold fast to the self she had built at Winterbourne, the capable, confident woman who managed estates and commanded respect. That woman would not crumble simply because her husband had revealed himself to be broken rather than cruel. Though which was worse, she could not quite decide. Alistair recovered slowly over the following weeks. Marguerite remained in London, staying at the Grosvenor Square townhouse, but maintaining a careful distance from her husband. They saw each other at meals, once he was strong enough to leave his chambers, and the conversations were polite, careful things, discussions of his health, updates on Winterbourne, neutral topics that skirted around the chasm of hurt and misunderstanding that yawned between them. Dr. Harrison pronounced him well enough to travel by mid-March, nearly 2 months after Marguerite's arrival in London. She had already made arrangements to return to Winterbourne, and Alistair, true to his word, announced his intention to accompany her. "You are certain you are well enough?" Marguerite asked the evening before their departure. They were in the drawing room, she with her embroidery, he with a book he had not turned a page in for 20 minutes. "I am certain I have imposed on your kindness long enough," Alistair replied. "It is time I saw what you have made of Winterbourne. Pastime, in truth." Marguerite set down her embroidery and looked at him directly. He had regained some weight during his convalescence, though he remained thinner than was healthy. The stark gauntness had softened, but something else had changed too. The rigid coldness she remembered from their wedding had given way to something more tentative, almost vulnerable. "I want you to understand something before we make this journey," she said carefully. "Winterbourne is my home. I have made it so through 4 years of work and care. When you see it, you will be seeing what I created in spite of your abandonment, not because of anything you provided beyond funds. I need to know you understand that distinction." "I do." He closed the book, giving her his full attention. "I understand that you took a prison and made it a home. That you accomplished more in my absence than I managed in years of neglecting my duty. I am not coming to Winterbourne to claim credit, Lady Montrose. I am coming to bear witness to your achievement and to determine whether I might have any place in the life you have built." The honesty in his voice made Marguerite's throat tighten. "Very well. Then we depart at dawn." The journey took them 5 days, the same route Marguerite had traveled alone 4 months earlier when she rushed to London fearing Alistair would die before she could demand her answers. This time, they traveled together, sharing the carriage in a silence that was neither comfortable nor entirely hostile. Sometimes Alistair read. Sometimes Marguerite watched the landscape roll past. And sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite interpret. Regret, perhaps, mixed with something else she dared not name. They arrived at Winterbourne on an afternoon when spring had finally begun to assert itself. The moorland stretched green and wild under a sky scattered with clouds, and the house, her house, rose from the landscape like something from a painting. The walls had been cleaned and repointed. The garden showed the first signs of the elaborate plantings Marguerite had designed. The drive was neatly raked, lined with young trees that would grow into a proper avenue given time. Alistair said nothing as the carriage drew up before the entrance, but Marguerite saw his eyes widen as he took in the transformation. Hartwell and Mrs. Hartwell waited at the door with the assembled staff, and Marguerite saw the pride in their faces as they welcomed their mistress home and eyed the master with undisguised curiosity. "Welcome to Winterbourne, my lord," Hartwell said with a bow. "We have prepared your chambers. I trust the journey was not too taxing." "The journey was enlightening," Alistair replied, his gaze still moving over the house and grounds. "Thank you, Hartwell. I look forward to seeing more." Over the next week, Marguerite showed him everything. The restored rooms, each one decorated with care and furnished with pieces she had discovered in attics or purchased from local craftsmen. The kitchen gardens producing vegetables and herbs that supplied not only the manor, but several village families. The tenant farms, where she introduced him to farmers who greeted her with genuine warmth, and him with cautious respect. She took him to the mill she had helped modernize, to the school where village children learned their letters, to the church where the vicar spoke of her generosity and steady presence. She showed him account books that proved Winterbourne was not merely self-sustaining, but profitable. She demonstrated that she understood crop rotation and market prices, that she could negotiate with merchants and settle disputes between tenants. And through it all, Alistair said little. But he watched. He listened. And Marguerite could see understanding dawning in his eyes, recognition of what he had thrown away, what he had nearly destroyed through his determination to protect her from the imagined curse of his presence. On the 7th evening, after a day spent riding the estate boundaries, they took supper together in the small dining room Marguerite preferred to the cavernous, formal one. The meal was simple: roasted chicken from the estate, vegetables from the kitchen garden, bread baked that morning. Outside, the last light was fading from a sky streaked with pink and gold. "I owe you an apology," Alistair said abruptly, setting down his fork. "A better one than I gave you in London, when I was fevered and half mad." Marguerite folded her hands in her lap and waited. "I thought I was protecting you," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I convinced myself that keeping you here, away from me, was an act of kindness, that I was sparing you the misery of being married to a man capable of driving his wife to suicide. But what I actually did was imprison you in isolation and call it generosity. I robbed you of choice, of agency, of the possibility of building any kind of meaningful life, and then you did build one anyway, despite me, and I am..." He stopped, struggling for words. "I am humbled and ashamed, and so deeply sorry I hardly know how to express it." "Why did you come back?" Marguerite asked quietly. "Not to England. I know the diplomatic mission ended. But why did you decide, after the fever broke, to come to Winterbourne? You could have sent another letter, could have continued as we had been." "Because I almost died," Alistair said simply. "And during the fever, when I thought death was coming for me, I realized that I had not lived at all in the 3 years since Rosalind died. I had existed. I had performed my duties. I accepted the diplomatic mission to Africa, hoping, perhaps, that the danger would put an end to my misery. It was a form of penance. But when the fever came, I realized I did not want to die. I wanted a chance to live," he continued. "When Dr. Harrison told me you were there, that you had sat at my bedside through the worst of it, I could not understand why. And then I remembered what you said, that you could not bear for me to die alone, even after everything I had done to you." He looked at her directly, and Marguerite saw tears standing in his eyes. "You asked me to think about why you would make that choice. I have thought of little else. And the only answer I can find is that you are a better person than I have any right to know. Certainly better than I deserve." "I am not particularly good," Marguerite said, though the words caught in her throat. "I am simply someone who believes that people deserve basic human kindness, even people who have hurt me. That is the definition of goodness, I think. Alistair stood and moved to the window, looking out over the darkening moorland. I came to Winterbourne to witness what you have built, and now that I have seen it, I understand that you do not need me. You have made a life here that is full and purposeful without any contribution from me, so I will honor my promise to you. We can arrange a separation if you wish. I will ensure you retain Winterbourne and a generous income for life. You will be free. Marguerite rose as well, her heart pounding. And if I do not wish to be free? He turned to face her, his expression startled. I do not understand. I said in London that I would not continue living as if I were invisible, that I deserved a marriage that acknowledged my worth. I stand by that. She moved closer, closing the distance between them. But I did not say I wanted to end our marriage, only that I wanted it to be real. How can it be real after what I have done? How can you possibly? Because I have spent 4 years learning to see clearly, Marguerite interrupted. To see people as they are, not as I wish them to be. And what I see when I look at you, Lord Montrose, is not a monster. I see a man who made terrible mistakes born of pain and fear, a man who has been punishing himself for something that was not entirely his fault, a man who, I think, might be capable of better if given the chance. You are offering me a chance? His voice held wonder and disbelief in equal measure. After everything? I am offering us both a chance. Marguerite took a breath, steadying herself for what she was about to say. I propose that we begin again. Not as strangers forced into a marriage of convenience, but as two people who might, given time and effort, build something real. It will not be easy. There is much hurt to overcome. But if you are willing to try, truly try, not simply go through motions, then so am I. Alistair stared at her for a long moment, his expression shifting from disbelief to something that looked almost like hope. You would give me that chance? His voice was barely above a whisper. After everything I have done? Not easily, Marguerite admitted, and not without conditions. Trust must be earned, my lord. Through actions, not words. Through consistency, not grand gestures. I understand. He nodded slowly. Then I will earn it, however long it takes, whatever you require of me. Then let us begin, Marguerite said quietly, slowly, carefully, as two people learning to know each other for the first time. They did not rush. The following morning, Marguerite took Alistair to inspect the new irrigation system she had designed for the eastern fields. The tenant farmer, William Graves, explained the persistent flooding problem that had plagued the land for years. My lady suggested we redirect the stream using a series of channels, Graves said, gesturing to the network of carefully dug trenches. Said she'd read about similar systems used in the Low Countries. Thought it was madness at first, begging your pardon, my lady, but it worked, saved the entire autumn planting. Alistair studied the system, then turned to Marguerite with genuine admiration. You designed this? I read widely during my exile, she replied with a slight edge to her voice. One develops interests when one has no company. He flinched at the reminder, but did not look away. It is ingenious. Graves, has Lady Montrose suggested implementing this on the other farms? She has, my lord. We were waiting on approval for the expense. You have it, Alistair said immediately, then paused and looked at Marguerite. That is, if Lady Montrose agrees it is the proper course. She understands these lands far better than I. It was a small moment, but Marguerite felt something shift inside her. He had not tried to take credit. He had not dismissed her authority. He had, for perhaps the first time, genuinely acknowledged her competence. Over the following months, they learned each other slowly, carefully, like people learning a new language. They took walks across the moorland, and Alistair told her about his childhood at Ravenwood Hall, about the pressure to be perfect that had shaped him into someone rigid and closed. One evening, as they watched the sun set over the cliffs, Marguerite asked the question that had haunted her since London. What truly happened with Rosalind? You told me she took her life, but I sense there is more to the story. Alistair was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Then quietly, he began to speak. She took a lover, my closest friend, a man I had known since childhood. They were not discreet. Everyone in London knew before I did. Can you imagine the humiliation? When I finally confronted her, she laughed at me, said I was a fool if I thought a marriage of duty meant she owed me fidelity, said she was with child, his child, not mine, and that I could go to the devil if I thought she would give up her happiness for my pride. He paused, his jaw working. I was furious. I said terrible things about the scandal, about her dishonor, about how she had destroyed everything. I told her that society would shun her, that her child would be born a bastard, that she had ruined us both. She said I had never loved her, had only wanted a decorative wife to display like one of my horses. Then she walked to the tower at Ravenwood Hall. His voice broke. I followed her. I was still angry, still raging about honor and duty and all the things I thought mattered. She climbed to the top, and I followed, thinking I could make her see reason. But when we reached the parapet, she looked at me with such hatred. She said, "You will never forgive me, and I cannot live with your loathing." Then she stepped off the edge while I stood there, too shocked to move. Marguerite felt tears on her face. That was not your fault. Was it not? I drove her to such desperation. I made her feel there was no other way. She made a choice, Marguerite said firmly. A terrible choice, but hers alone. You were betrayed, Alistair. Your anger was justified. What she did, that was not your doing. Society did not see it that way. They said I was cruel, cold, that I had destroyed a beautiful young woman with my impossible standards. And perhaps they were right. They were not right, Marguerite insisted. You were hurt and angry and yes, perhaps harsh. But you did not push her from that tower. She chose to jump. And you have been punishing yourself and me for her choice ever since. They stood in silence as darkness fell around them, and Marguerite felt some of the weight lift from between them. The ghost of Rosalind would always be there, but perhaps, finally, it was beginning to fade. Marguerite told him about growing up with a father who gambled away everything they had, about the humiliation of watching their world crumble piece by piece. They worked together on the estate. Alistair discovered that Marguerite had a practical wisdom about the land and the people that he had never learned. In return, he shared his deep knowledge of London markets and the political dealings that dictated the price of wool and grain, giving her the power to increase Winterbourne's profits even further. She discovered that he had a dry sense of humor buried beneath years of grief and self-recrimination, and that when he smiled, truly smiled, it transformed his entire face. Slowly, tentatively, they began to touch. Not with passion at first, but with gentleness, his hand on her shoulder as they reviewed accounts, her fingers brushing his as they passed documents between them. Small connections, building trust. It was autumn before Alistair kissed her. They had been riding along the coast, watching the sunset paint the sea gold and crimson, when he turned to her and said quietly, "Margot." It was the first time he had used the diminutive, the first time he had addressed her with anything other than formal distance. Her breath caught. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. "I have wanted to for weeks now, but I will not presume. Not after everything I have put you through." She stopped his words by leaning up and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative, questioning. But when she pulled back, she saw in his eyes something that made her breath catch, joy, wonder, and something deeper that she was almost afraid to name. "Yes," she whispered, "you may kiss me. Always." That night, for the first time since their wedding nearly 5 years before, they shared a bed. And if their joining was gentle rather than passionate, tender rather than wild, it felt like healing nonetheless. like two damaged people finding in each other the possibility of wholeness. They renewed their vows the following spring in the small church at Winterbourne St. Mary. No London society, no elaborate ceremony, just the village people who had become Marguerite's family and a handful of Alistair's tenants from Ravenwood Hall who had heard of the Marquess's reformation and wanted to witness it. The vicar performing the ceremony seemed to glow with satisfaction as Alistair spoke the vows. The real vows, not the hollow words of their first wedding. When he said, "I do," his voice broke with emotion, and when Marguerite said the same, she meant it with her whole heart. Afterward, at the modest celebration in Winterbourne's restored drawing room, Alistair stood and raised his glass. "I want to thank you all for welcoming me into the community my wife, my extraordinary wife, has built here. I know I do not deserve the second chance I have been given, but I intend to spend the rest of my life earning it and honoring the woman who saved me from myself." He turned to Marguerite, and everyone else in the room seemed to fade away. "You took a broken man and a crumbling house and transformed both. You showed me that it is never too late to begin again, that mistakes, even terrible ones, need not define us forever. I love you, Margot. I will love you until my last breath, and I will never stop being grateful that you saw something in me worth saving." Marguerite rose and took his hand, tears streaming freely down her face. "I love you too," she said simply, "and I always will." The years that followed brought challenges, as all years do. There were arguments and misunderstandings, moments when old hurts resurfaced. But there was also laughter, partnership, and a growing family. 3 children born to parents who had learned that love was not something that happened in an instant, but something built slowly through choice and effort and forgiveness. They divided their time between Winterbourne and Ravenwood Hall, but it was Winterbourne that remained Marguerite's greatest achievement. The estate she had built from ruin, the community she had nurtured into thriving life. She published a treatise on estate management that became required reading for young landowners, and Alistair supported her work without jealousy, proud to be married to a woman whose wisdom exceeded his own. On their 10th anniversary, they stood together on the cliffs above Winterbourne, watching the sunset paint the moorland in shades of gold and purple. Alistair pulled Marguerite close, and she leaned into his embrace with the comfort of long familiarity. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Giving me a second chance when you could have been free?" Marguerite turned in his arms to face him. "Never. You asked me once why I came to London when you were ill. The answer is simple. Because even then, beneath all the hurt and anger, I recognized something in you that was worth fighting for, and I was right. I crossed half of England to beg your forgiveness," Alistair said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I would cross the world 1,000 times over for you, Margot. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will spend every remaining day proving that I know it." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon. 2 people who had found each other in the ruins of their separate disasters and built something beautiful from the wreckage. It had taken years, years of patience and work and choosing each other every single day. But standing there on the cliffs, wrapped in each other's arms and the golden light of evening, they knew that every moment of struggle had been worth it. Love, after all, was not about perfection. It was about choosing to build something together, even when the foundation was cracked and the walls needed repair. It was about seeing someone's worst and choosing to believe in their best. And it was about second chances, for both the person who had made mistakes and the person brave enough to forgive them. The end. Dear listener, perhaps you too have felt abandoned, cast aside by someone who should have valued you. Perhaps you have wondered if you are worthy of love, of consideration, of basic human kindness. Let Marguerite's story remind you, you are not defined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to respond. When life exiles you to your own Winterbourne, you have a choice. You can let bitterness consume you, or you can transform your prison into a palace. And perhaps, Like Marguerite, you will discover that the strongest foundation for love is not passion or circumstance, but the daily choice to see each other clearly, forgive imperfectly, and build something meaningful together despite the damage you both carry. Your worth does not diminish because someone failed to recognize it. Your capacity for joy does not disappear because someone tried to bury it. Tonight, as you rest, know that you are resilient beyond measure, that every exile can become an opportunity, that love, when it is real and chosen and fought for, can heal even the deepest wounds. You deserve that kind of love, and you are strong enough to create it, whether with another person or within yourself. Thank you for staying with us through Marguerite and Alistair's journey. If their story of resilience, forgiveness, and hard-won love touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories that remind us all. It is never too late to begin again.